It was a lazy Saturday afternoon when it all started, when I found the message. I was scrolling through my phone, distracted, when something caught my eye. It was an Instagram notification, not from me, but from my boyfriend's account. Engaged to the love of my life, it read, accompanied by a picture of him and some woman, their smiles all over the screen. I stared at it, completely still, as the reality sank in. He had proposed to someone else. He was engaged. To her, not me. The world seemed to fall away, like someone had pressed pause on my life. For a moment, I thought I was going crazy. This couldn't be real, right? We had been together for years. Or we had talked about the future. I never saw this coming. He thought I would stay, didn't he? I wasn't even important enough for him to tell me, to prepare me for the truth. She cried in silence, I thought, because if she only knew what he did to me, she would never believe the man standing next to her. I found the messages, the ones he'd sent to me just hours before. I love you so much, babe. Can't wait to see you tonight. Lies, all lies. He had been stringing me along, feeding me a false reality while planning something completely different. I felt like an idiot for believing him. He had been seeing her for months, making promises to both of us as though we were his only ones. Suddenly, I wasn't just angry. I was devastated, broken in ways I couldn't even express. I kept thinking about all the times he told me I was the one for him, how I was his future. Yet here I was, exposed to the cold truth. He betrayed me. He never saw it coming. But that's the thing with betrayal, right? It's a sharp turn, sudden and without warning. I couldn't let him get away with this. I needed to confront him, but I also knew that just showing up would be too easy. No, I had to take control. I had to make him understand what he had done. It was time to show him the proof. The truth came out, and it hit harder than I ever imagined. My silence had been my answer, but this was different. I wasn't going to hide anymore. As I sat there, staring at the screen, I realized that the woman he had proposed to didn't know the full story. She thought he was perfect, just like I had once believed. But I knew the truth about him, his lies, his manipulation. He had betrayed me, and I wasn't going to let it slide. No one would be left in the dark. I stood up, my mind racing. The anger in me built with each passing second. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about exposing the man he truly was. I didn't know how yet, but I was going to make sure the world saw him for what he really was. I would make sure she knew the truth, the lies he had fed me, the promises he had broken. When she was captured in the lie, I was going to make sure everyone saw who he truly was. I couldn't just let him get away with it. The idea had been brewing in my mind for hours, and when the evening came, I knew what I had to do. I didn't care about the consequences anymore. He had crossed the line, and it was my turn to take control of the situation. I had already been living in his shadow for so long, believing in his lies. Now it was time to turn the tables. I found out where they were, a fancy little engagement party at a private venue. I could practically hear the laughter in my head, imagine their happy faces, and it made my blood boil. He thought he had won, that he could play me like a fool, while pretending to be the perfect fiancé to her. But the truth was, he had no idea who he was dealing with. He never saw it coming. No way was I going to just sit back and let him walk away untouched. I couldn't help but smile a little as I put on my dress, one that I knew would make an impact. I wanted to look good, not to impress him, but to show him what he had lost. He thought I was nothing to him, but I was about to make him feel how it felt to lose something real, to lose me. When I arrived at the venue, everything seemed to stop. I could see them both, standing in the middle of the room, looking so blissfully unaware of what was coming. I was standing outside the door, just watching them. I could barely breathe, but I knew I was doing the right thing. I found the messages he had sent me, and now it was time to make sure she knew, to make him feel the weight of the betrayal. I walked in, and for a moment, everything went silent. I could see the shock on his face as I walked across the room. The look of pure disbelief in his eyes was priceless. He thought I would stay home, crying over him. He thought he could move on without facing the consequences of what he had done to me. But here I was, standing in front of them. She planned it all, I thought. Every word, every gesture, every lie had been a part of his plan, and now it was my turn to expose him. "Is this your fiancé?" I asked, turning to the woman standing beside him. Her face froze as she looked back at me, her smile faltering. The room was tense, and I could feel the eyes on me, judging, whispering, but I didn't care anymore. This wasn't about them. It was about me. It was about taking back the power I had lost, and showing him that I wasn't someone to be discarded. "He never told you about me, did he?" I continued, my voice steady but cold. "He never told you how he had me, all while planning a future with you. The truth came out tonight, and I'm the one who's going to make sure you know exactly who you're marrying." There was a stunned silence as I showed her the texts, the photos, the proof of everything he had been hiding. I had made sure to gather it all, leaving no room for doubt. I showed him the proof of his lies, and it felt so damn good. Watching his face go pale, his entire world falling apart, it was everything I needed. I didn't care about his apologies, his attempts at saving face. Nobody believed him anymore. I could see the shame in his eyes as he begged her to come back, to forgive him, but it was too late. The damage had been done, and I wasn't about to let him weasel his way out of it. The aftermath was almost too much to process. I had taken control of the situation, but now, standing there in the middle of their ruined engagement, I felt an overwhelming sense of loss. Not for him. He didn't deserve any sympathy from me. No, it was the shattered illusion that hurt the most. I had given him everything, trusted him with my heart, and this was the price I paid for being deceived. I was deceived, and no matter how many times I replayed it in my head, the truth was clear. He had never loved me the way I deserved. I left the party shortly after the confrontation, my hands trembling with adrenaline and anger. I had exposed him, but it didn't feel like enough. The truth had been revealed, but his pleas echoed in my mind. He begged her to come back, as if everything would go back to normal, as if he could just erase the damage he had caused. I couldn't even look at him without feeling disgusted. He thought everything was going to be okay. He never thought I would actually do something like this. I hadn't realized how deep my pain ran until I got back home. I sat in my apartment, the silence deafening. It was in these quiet moments that everything hit me like a ton of bricks. The loneliness, the heartbreak, the betrayal. He broke me first, and now I was left to pick up the pieces. I didn't know where to go from here, but I knew I couldn't let him have the last word. I had to take control of my own healing, even if it felt like my world was collapsing. The phone calls started soon after. At first, it was just a few texts, apologizing for the way everything turned out. I ignored them. Then, it was the phone. Calls, begging for a chance to explain, but there was nothing he could say to make it better. Nothing that would undo the lies, the manipulation, or the way he had taken advantage of my trust. His words were hollow, and I wasn't falling for them anymore. The hardest part wasn't just him reaching out. It was seeing how he tried to paint himself as the victim. He said I had been too harsh, that I was overreacting. I realized then just how much he truly thought I would stay. After everything, after the deceit, he still believed I was that same woman who would quietly endure whatever he threw my way. But he was wrong. I wasn't that woman anymore. His pleas continued for days, but I didn't respond. I had already said everything I needed to say. I had exposed him for who he truly was. He wasn't the person I had fallen in love with, and he certainly wasn't the person I wanted in my life anymore. But there was still that nagging feeling, a part of me wondering if deep down he ever truly cared. I thought about everything we had been through, all the moments that had seemed real at the time. How could someone who had shared those moments with me turn out to be so different from the person I had imagined? I was left with so many questions, so much betrayal that it felt suffocating. But even in the middle of this mess, I knew I had to keep moving forward. I couldn't let his lies define me any longer. Eventually, I blocked his number. I stopped checking my phone, stopped hoping he would come to his senses. I realized that this wasn't just about him, it was about me, about finding my strength. Again, even if it meant facing the truth that I had been wronged in ways I never imagined. She cried in silence, I thought, but not anymore. Not me. I had my voice now, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away. And as the days passed, I began to feel a sense of peace, the kind that comes with knowing the truth. The kind that comes with revenge, not in the form of payback, but in the form of reclaiming your power. I wasn't the same person who had walked into that engagement party. I was stronger, more determined, and ready to let go of everything that had held me back. But even as I moved on, there was one more thing I had to do, one more step before I could finally close this chapter for good. It wasn't easy. There were days when I couldn't shake the memories, when I felt his presence haunting every corner of my life. I had to remind myself constantly that I had made the right decision, that I had done what needed to be done. But moving on wasn't as simple as just blocking his number or ignoring his calls. The emotional scars ran deeper than I had realized, and healing was something that took time, more time than I was ready for. The first few weeks after everything happened were the hardest. I spent my days at work, pushing through the motions, but at night, the weight of everything would come crashing down. I had never felt so alone. She cried in silence, I remembered, and in a way I was too. Not because I missed him, but because I was grieving the life I thought I was building, the future I had envisioned with him that now felt like a cruel joke. It was hard to admit that I had wasted so much time with someone who didn't value me. The silence was the hardest part. I'd wake up every morning, check my phone, and remember that I wasn't going to get those sweet texts from him anymore. The sweet promises that now seemed like lies. The lies he had told me. The things I had let myself believe. It hurt. He betrayed me, and somehow I still felt the sting. But the difference now was that I wasn't letting the pain define me. It was just a part of the journey, a chapter that I had to close in order to move forward. And then there was the part where I had to forgive myself. I had let someone break me down so many times, believing that love meant staying, even when I wasn't being treated the way I deserved. He thought I would stay, but I hadn't. And for that, I was proud of myself. That was my moment of growth, realizing that I deserved more than the scraps he was offering. That I deserved a love that was real, not one built on lies and manipulation. But moving on didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean erasing everything we had shared. It was about accepting the truth and learning from it. The truth came out in the most painful way, but I had to acknowledge that it was what had set me free. He never saw it coming, and while I had hoped for some kind of apology or closure, I realized that what I needed wasn't from him. It was from me. I needed to forgive myself for staying too long. I needed to forgive myself for not trusting my instincts sooner. I started to rebuild. It wasn't a smooth process. There were setbacks, days when the hurt would resurface. But with each passing day, I felt stronger. I started focusing on my career again, picking up the pieces of my life and putting them together in ways I hadn't done in years. I found my purpose again, and as I grew stronger, I started to realize that my silence had been my answer all along. As time went on, I stopped feeling the need to check up on him. I had my own life to live. The weight of the past no longer controlled me, and while I couldn't forget everything, I could choose how I let it affect me. She finally left, I thought. She left the past behind, and so would I. The healing wasn't linear, but it was happening, and for the first time in a long time, I was beginning to feel like myself again. But then, just when I thought I had it all together, something unexpected happened. I was out with friends one night when I saw a familiar face in the crowd. It was him, the man who had once been my everything, standing there as if nothing had ever happened. My heart stopped. For a moment, I was transported back to that time when I believed he was all I needed. But then I remembered everything. I remembered the betrayal, and I knew I wasn't that person anymore. It was in that moment that I realized just how far I had come. I didn't need to confront him, didn't need to prove anything to him. My actions, my strength, my silence, it was all the proof I needed. He had no power over me anymore. I had taken my life back, and as I walked past him without saying a word, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Months had passed. I was finally starting to feel like myself again, stronger, more independent, and no longer holding on to the past. I had learned to love myself again, to trust my own instincts, and to prioritize my happiness. But life, as it often does, had a way of throwing curveballs when I least expected them, and nothing could have prepared me for the phone call that would change everything. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was at home, curled up with a book, enjoying the calm of my own space. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, breaking the silence. I didn't recognize the number, but something inside me told me to answer. When I did, the voice on the other end hit me like a punch to the gut. It was him, my ex. He begged her to come back. The words echoed in my mind, and now he was asking for my forgiveness. At first, I couldn't believe it. He had moved on. He had married someone else. For God's sake, he had everything he had wanted. So why was he calling me now? Why did he feel the need to reach out to me after all that had happened? I could barely process the fact that after everything, after all the lies and manipulation, he was standing there asking me for another chance. But the truth hit me quickly. This wasn't about me. This was about his guilt. She exposed him. The truth was out there, and it had followed him, just like it followed me. He had been hiding from it, pretending everything was okay. But now, the reality of what he had done was catching up with him. I knew that much. I didn't need to hear the sob story he was offering. I knew exactly why he was calling. He thought that if he could get me to forgive him, maybe it would erase the mess he had created. But forgiveness doesn't work that way. I took a deep breath and listened to his words. His voice shook as he begged for another chance, promising that he had changed. But I knew better. He never saw it coming, the consequences of his actions. He thought he could play with my heart and walk away unscathed. But life doesn't work like that. I wasn't the same woman he had walked away from. I was stronger now, more self-aware, and I refused to let his guilt drag me back into the toxic cycle. I hung up the phone without saying another word. The silence was my answer. It had to be. I had already wasted enough time in the past, and there was no place for him in my future. He broke me first, and I wasn't going to allow him the chance to do it again. I had learned my lesson the hard way. My heart didn't belong to him anymore. It belonged to me, and I was done letting anyone take it away from me. But the truth was, I wasn't as unaffected by his words as I like to think. The call lingered in my mind long after I hung up. It wasn't about him. This was about me, about how far I had come, and how easy it was to slip back into the old habits of second-guessing myself. I didn't need him to validate me anymore, but for a split second, I had questioned whether I was making the right choice by shutting him out. As I sat there, I reflected on everything we had been through, the lies, the betrayals, the moments when I thought I was nothing to him, but he was everything to me. I was deceived, I realized. Betrayal had come in many forms, but it was never as ugly as the way it had manifested between us. It wasn't just a moment of weakness on his part. It was a pattern, a life built on deceit. I wasn't the one who had failed him. He had failed me, and that was something I couldn't forgive. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the world. Outside, it was sunny, warm. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight lift off my shoulders. I had survived it. I had walked through the fire and come out stronger, and I wasn't going to let the past, or him, ruin my future. I knew that I had to let go of this final chapter. I had been holding on to it for too long, giving it space in my mind and heart when it no longer had a place there. I didn't owe him anything, and that was the most liberating feeling in the world. But life, as it often does, had a way of keeping things interesting. As I closed the door on the past, I couldn't help but wonder, what would the next chapter of my life look like? It's funny how, after everything that happened, I thought I'd never be able to move on. At first, it felt like the pain would swallow me whole. The betrayal, the broken trust, the constant reminders of how he betrayed me. It was overwhelming. I felt like I was stuck in a never-ending cycle of hurt, and I couldn't escape it. But as time went on, something shifted inside me. I began to realize that moving on wasn't about forgetting. It was about letting go of him, letting go of the bitterness, letting go of the idea that I had been wronged in some way that couldn't be undone. The more I tried to hold onto the anger, the more it ate away at me. It was like holding onto a burning coal, thinking that somehow it would hurt him more than it hurt me. But the truth was, the only one suffering was me, and I was done with that. The healing process wasn't immediate, though. It didn't come overnight. But one day, I woke up and realized I didn't need him anymore. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for an apology that would never come. My silence was my answer. The closure I had been searching for wasn't going to come from him. It was going to come from within me. And when I found that peace, everything else just started to fall into place. I took back control of my life in ways I had never imagined. I started to focus on myself, on my goals, my dreams, my future. For the first time in years, I was living for me. I surrounded myself with people who lifted me up, who saw my worth, and who respected me. And slowly, I began to understand just how much power I had all along. She planned it all, the life I wanted, the life I deserved. And now, I was the one in charge of my own destiny. But of course, there were moments of doubt. There were days when I questioned if I had made the right decision. He begged her to come back, he'd said in that last phone call, and part of me wondered if I was being too harsh. Maybe I had overreacted. Maybe I was punishing him too much for his mistakes. But then I remembered all the times he had walked away from me, all the moments when I had been nothing to him but a convenience. He never saw me for who I really was, someone worth fighting for. It wasn't about holding grudges. It was about respecting myself enough to know that I wasn't going to let anyone treat me like that again. I had allowed myself to be deceived, but I wasn't going to stay deceived. I had learned my lesson, and it had come with a hard price. But that price was worth it, because it taught me my own worth. I wasn't just some person to be tossed aside when it was convenient. I had value, and I wasn't going to settle for anything less. The truth came out in the end, didn't it? Not just about him, but about me. I realized that I had been holding on to this idea that I needed him to validate me, but the reality was, I had always been enough. I was the one who had the strength to walk away. I was the one who had the courage to rebuild my life. And I wasn't going to let anyone, not even him, take that power away from me. There were moments when I thought about him, sure. Moments when I remembered the good times, when I wondered if we could have worked things out. But then I'd remind myself of everything that had happened. The lies, the manipulation, the stories of betrayal. And it was clear, I wasn't just walking away from him. I was walking away from the person I had become while I was with him. In the end, moving on wasn't about erasing the past. It was about accepting it and using it as a springboard to create something better. I could take what I had learned, the lessons I had gained, and turn them into strength. I could turn my pain into power, and that was exactly what I was doing. But as I continued on this journey of self-discovery, I couldn't help but wonder, what would come next? What new challenges would life throw my way now that I had freed myself from the past? You know, just when I thought I had finally shaken off the weight of the past, it came rushing back in a way I never expected. He thought I would stay, didn't he? I guess he figured that no matter what he did, I would always be there, waiting for him to come around. Well, he was wrong, but he never saw it coming. The one thing he didn't count on was me standing up for myself, walking away, and taking control of my life. But just when I thought I had left it all behind, he showed up. It wasn't a phone call. It wasn't a text. It was him standing on my doorstep, looking like he'd been through hell and back. I wasn't sure if I should be shocked, angry, or just laugh at the audacity. She exposed him, after all, and now he was back, pleading for forgiveness, asking for a second chance. Did he really think I would just let him back in like nothing ever happened? I won't lie, there was a part of me that wanted to let him back in, the part that remembered the good times, the part that wanted to believe that people can change. But then, I remembered how much I had suffered, how much I had given up for someone who had treated me like I was nothing to him. No apology was going to erase the betrayal. No matter how many times he said he was sorry, he broke me first. And no matter how much time had passed, the damage couldn't be undone. I stood there, listening to him, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel that familiar pang of longing. Instead, I felt a strange sense of calm. My silence was my answer. I didn't need to say anything more. The truth had already been laid out before me, and there was no going back. I had learned to be strong without him, to find peace on my own, and I wasn't about to throw that away. But what really got to me wasn't just the way he begged for my forgiveness. It was the fact that he thought he could just walk back into my life after everything that had happened. The audacity. She planned it all. The decision to move on, to rebuild, to stop waiting for someone who never truly saw my worth. And yet, here he was, trying to rewrite history. Well, I wasn't going to let him. I remember standing there, staring at him, and thinking about all the times I had felt weak, all the times I had doubted myself. But now, I wasn't that person anymore. I had rebuilt myself, piece by piece. And the last thing I was going to do was let him pull me back into the past I had worked so hard to escape. He didn't deserve that. I knew he was hoping for a happy ending, that somehow we could start fresh. But I couldn't shake the memory of the lies, the manipulations, the betrayal that had been so deeply rooted in everything he had said and done. And no matter how many times he apologized, it wasn't going to change the truth. The truth came out a long time ago, and it was too late for him to change the narrative. It was in that moment that I realized something important. Moving on wasn't just about getting away from the person who hurt you. It was about reclaiming your own sense of self. It was about recognizing your worth and never allowing anyone to make you feel like you're less than you are. He had tried to break me, but instead, he had only made me stronger. And that's something he would never understand. But as I walked away, part of me couldn't help but wonder, why now? What had changed for him? What made him think he could come back and undo everything he had done? Did he really think that she planned it all? That I had been waiting for him to come back so we could live our perfect little life again? I wasn't about to let him rewrite our story. There's a moment, you know? A moment when everything just clicks, and you realize that holding on is only hurting you more. For the longest time, I kept holding on to this version of him, this idea of him that I thought I needed. But as time passed, I started seeing him for who he truly was, and it wasn't the man I had imagined in my head. He betrayed me in ways I couldn't even begin to explain, and the hardest part was accepting that I wasn't the one who had the power to fix him. I couldn't change him. I couldn't save him. And that realization, that I was the one who needed to change, was a gut punch. But in the best way possible. It wasn't a painful moment of defeat. It was a moment of empowerment. She cried in silence for too long, thinking that somehow, if she just stayed quiet, things would get better. But silence doesn't heal everything. Sometimes you have to speak up, even if it's just for your own sanity. It wasn't easy, letting go. In fact, it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But as I started pulling away, I began to see something else emerge, my own strength. I wasn't just a victim in this story anymore. He thought I would stay, but I was done. I wasn't going to live my life waiting for someone to change, for someone to recognize my worth. I was done letting him control my happiness. The hardest part wasn't even his betrayal. It was my own betrayal. The betrayal of myself, for allowing myself to stay in a relationship that didn't serve me. I was deceived, but more than that, I had deceived myself. I thought love could fix things. I thought time would make everything okay, but love isn't supposed to hurt like that. And time only made me realize how much I had lost by staying. As I let go, I started seeing the cracks that had formed over time, the emotional scars that had been buried under the surface, the moments when I should have walked away but didn't. But now I was ready to heal. I wasn't going to be the person who kept looking back. He never saw it coming, but I wasn't the same person who had once blindly loved him. I was stronger, braver, and determined to never let anyone take away my peace again. I had spent so much time trying to figure him out, trying to make sense of the stories of betrayal that kept repeating in my head. But the truth was, I didn't need to understand him anymore. I didn't need to search for answers. I had everything I needed right in front of me, my own strength, my own resilience, and that was enough. Moving on wasn't about forgetting. It wasn't about pretending that nothing ever happened. It was about recognizing that I deserved better, that I was worthy of love that didn't come with strings attached or hidden agendas. She finally left, and it wasn't just about walking away from him. It was about walking toward something better, something that was all mine. And yet, even as I walked away, part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. But that was the thing, wasn't it? Healing doesn't come all at once. It takes time, and sometimes you have to take a few steps forward before you realize you're not going back. But every step I took away from him was a step closer to finding myself again. I had no idea where this new path would lead, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. She planned it all, and no matter how much I doubted myself in the past, I knew that the future was mine to shape. I wasn't going to let fear hold me back anymore. The past was gone, and the only thing left to do was look ahead. It was just when I thought I had everything figured out that he decided to make an appearance. After all the heartache, after everything he had put me through, I never expected him to come back. But there he was, standing at my door, with a look in his eyes that seemed to scream remorse. He begged her to come back, but I wasn't the same person I once was. I wasn't that naive girl who thought love could fix everything. I'll admit, a part of me felt something, a flicker of the old feelings, a twinge of nostalgia for the man I once thought I loved. But then I remembered the truth that had been hiding in the corners of my mind, waiting for me to face it. The truth came out, and there was no going back. I had already faced the reality of what he had done, and no apology could erase the hurt he caused. But he didn't stop there. He showed up with his usual charm, trying to convince me that he had changed, that he was a different man now. He thought I would stay, that I would somehow fall for his act again. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. Not this time. I had learned the hard way that words were easy, but actions were what truly mattered. I looked at him, and for a moment, I felt pity, but it wasn't the kind of pity I used to feel, where I wanted to save him, fix him, make everything okay. No, this was the kind of pity that came with the realization that he was broken beyond repair, and it wasn't my job to fix him. She exposed him in front of me, and I couldn't unsee what I now knew about who he really was. He stood there, waiting for me to take him back, but all I could think about was how much he had stolen from me. He had taken my time, my love, my trust, and for what? To throw it all away? To treat me like I was nothing to him? I was nothing to him, just another person to use and discard when it was convenient. But I wasn't going to let him make me feel small anymore. I knew that if I let him back into my life, I would be allowing him to break me once again. He broke me first, and I wasn't going to let him have that power over me anymore. Not now. Not ever. I had already learned the hard way what it felt like to be deceived, to trust someone who didn't deserve it, but that lesson was over now. I was done with that chapter of my life. He kept apologizing, pleading with me, but I wasn't listening. I didn't need his words anymore. I needed action. So I showed him the proof that I wasn't the same woman who had once believed in him. I wasn't the same person who had given him everything and gotten nothing in return. I was stronger now, and I knew that this time I wouldn't let him back in. It was hard, watching him stand there, begging, but I knew I couldn't let my emotions cloud my judgment. Nobody believed her, but I believed in myself now. I knew what I was worth, and I knew I deserved better. I wasn't going to settle for someone who had betrayed me. Not again. Not ever. He left, eventually, and as he walked away, I realized that I had done the right thing. I had chosen myself, and even though part of me had wanted to believe his apologies, deep down, I knew that this was the only way to truly move on. Sometimes, walking away is the bravest thing you can do, and in that moment, I was proud of myself for doing it. The days following his departure were strange. It was like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders, but at the same time, I couldn't quite shake off the feeling of emptiness. She finally left his shadow from my life, but the scars still lingered, faint reminders of everything I had endured. It wasn't easy, nothing about healing ever is, but in the silence, in the space he had once occupied, I began to find myself again. For the first time in a long while, I could hear my own thoughts without the echo of his voice demanding my attention. The silence wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It felt like freedom. It was in these quiet moments that I realized something. I had been deceived, but I wasn't broken. I was stronger than I had ever been, and the worst thing he could have done was push me into a space where I had to rebuild. And rebuild I did. It wasn't instant. There were days when I would sit with my emotions, letting them wash over me. My silence was my answer to the noise he tried to bring into my life. The silence was my way of saying, I don't need your words anymore. I didn't need him, his lies, or his manipulation. I didn't need anyone who couldn't respect the woman I had become. But even as I found my strength, there were moments when the weight of the betrayal would hit me like a wave. The sadness, the disappointment, They were like shadows that crept in, reminding me of the trust I had once placed in him. Stories of betrayal swirled in my mind, making me question everything I had thought was real. It was hard not to feel like I had been blindsided, that he had betrayed me in ways I could never have imagined. But as painful as it was, I refused to let that define me. One day, I found myself sitting in a coffee shop, watching the world go by, and I realized something profound. I had learned that I could survive, I could thrive, even after the betrayal, even after the heartbreak. I was deceived, yes, but that didn't mean I was broken. It just meant I had to get a little smarter, a little more aware of what I truly deserved. In that moment, I vowed to never let anyone make me feel small again. The lesson had been harsh, but necessary. I wasn't going to let my past dictate my future. He never saw it coming, and that was the part I was most proud of. I had taken my power back, and he would never have the chance to take it from me. Again, I started rebuilding my life, piece by piece. The pain still lingered, but it was manageable now. I found peace in the little things, in the moments where I could just be myself, without fear of betrayal. And as I rebuilt, I began to realize something else. Revenge wasn't about destroying him. It was about living my best life, proving to myself that I was worthy of so much more than what he had given me. My journey wasn't over, but I had come a long way. There was still work to be done, still healing to be had, but I was no longer afraid of what lay ahead. The best part? I wasn't doing it for him. I was doing it for me, and that, in itself, was the most powerful thing of all.